Good evening, and welcome to The Realm of Ideas is Free to All. This is episode 41, Organic Design Thinking, number 2, Process. This is a series of ruminations I do once a week in the morning, early morning of Sunday, now that football season is upon us. Looking forward to that. Go Raiders and Redskins. So, like I said, my name is Bruce Gemmel. I'm a architectural researcher and draftsman, and I do these ruminations once a week, kind of my way of kind of figuring out my way through the work that I've done over the course of my career. Anyway, so how did we start? We started on the 1st of December 2024 with a topic called the operation of the metaphor. Interesting topic for an architect. What was interesting was when I look back on the way in which I kind of found myself in this place, there are certain things I do believe that are kind of fairly unique to my particular approach to my vocation as an architect. I believe that architecture is a process, as a verb, as an action. I believe that architecture is metaphor driven, and it's a generative strategy that basically depends on that. And there's a series of kind of other things in terms of the process of what I call organic design thinking, which we're going to be talking about tonight, which I believe is kind of like a way to introduce us, if not specifically to an organic architecture, at least move us in that direction. I believe that an organic architecture is essential and necessary. I believe it's been an aspiration of architects for a very long time, but I believe that there's actually a long way to go, but at least we're kind of moving in that direction. So the introduction was the operation of the metaphor. I discussed the idea of what I felt the metaphor was, and what it was to me was basically an idea of kind of combining concepts to generate new concepts. I believe that we sometimes get misled and believe that words are basically just nothing more than kind of like simple kind of like pieces used together as almost they're an extension of the alphabet rather than as a result of the alphabet, in order to kind of embed themselves into things that are much more symbolic, weighty, and conceptual. So then I started looking at 3 ways in which I felt the metaphor could be viewed. Most people think of the metaphor as something that exists in the literary kind of art space. And I kind of like saw, as my kind of observations led me to believe that it's actually kind of like an accretion of the natural impulse in the universe. So I talked about the idea of the organic metaphor. Then I talked about the idea of the artificial metaphor, which is what we know, which we understand, which is how I got involved in understanding it as a generative process through my reading of kind of like the work of Ortega-Gasset. And then started talking about the unbreakable bond, or what I call the proto-metaphor, or the kind of like societal or cultural metaphor, which is basically a series of kind of markers that we can find. And this kind of like alluded to some of the things that like Alfred North Whitehead talks about in his book Adventures of Ideas, where he kind of charted a way in which he could kind of say Western culture, for what it is, has been able to kind of mark itself as a place through these series of investigations as a result of understanding the importance of these things that were basically contextual and related to how those things allowed us to get from where we were to where we are. And I, in fact, also talked about how there was a similarity between that and the ideas of Ortega, even though I'd never really know, and I don't think there was much contact, maybe personal contact, even though there were contemporaries between Ortega and Whitehead, but they certainly had, overlapping ideas. Certainly that idea, the fact that I am myself and my circumstance, and the idea of generations was certainly something that Ortega understood, that were kind of ideas that very similar to things that Whitehead was talking about. Metaphysically, Ortega's work is not as deep and as rich and as revolutionary and provocative as Whitehead's. I feel as if even though perspectivism was a kind of like a valuable circumstance, I believe it kind of fits well within process philosophy, but it's not as deep and rich in terms of like the kind of questioning that fundamental idea of becoming as a process, as a kind of idea of kind of like sustainable things over time, as opposed to kind of like the kind of artificial process that we kind of go back to the Greeks, back to Parmenides. Anyway, so those were the kind of the beginnings of the first 4 lectures. And then from there, the next 3 were the value and necessity of criticism, the art of finding what needs to be said, and a view of criticism as an indicator of societal health. So it actually, the last one built on the premise that we kind of finished up with the first 3, which was the idea that you could indicate the value of something that had been established as a kind of priority by the way it was being treated, and that would give you an indicator of how society was handling things. So it's kind of like someone who abuses his family, abuses his children, abuses his job, or abuses other people. You see the fact that this person doesn't understand or value the importance of those things. And I felt that one of the things that I have always felt ever since I was young, since I was a boy, was this idea that we don't really understand and appreciate the value of criticism, and that this is something that I see as a major issue, and it is a kind of indictment of our kind of like society, and it is an indicator of a lack of real health within the society. So after that, I talked about specific things. So that was kind of like the way in which the object of architecture was viewed. Then I talked about the things within the kind of generation of the architecture, which was architecture as a verb or a process. Then I talked about drawing, and then I talked about an organic architecture, which was kind of asserting what my premise was in terms of how I was going to proceed. From there, I talked about the authority of ideas, and then I talked about my past architecture, my recent past architecture, and the aftermath of organic design thinking, which was the 3 steps. And it seemed like it was kind of like a 3 pieces to get through a certain thing. So the first 3 were basically the metaphor. Then there was criticism. Then there was the tools. Then it kind of went to the actual history, my own kind of like particular past. I talked about my youth. I talked about my days as a kind of student and as a professor. And then I talked about the post-professorial, the post-academic world, which was when I basically felt as if it was time for me to go off on my own path, as I didn't really see a tremendous amount of necessity or use in kind of staying within the academy. I mean, there were other aspects and other factors that kind of like were more related to the kind of the circumstance within the academy, which really, I won't say that was the reason I left, but I just felt as if like the particular intellectual environment that I saw within it was not something that I felt in New York City was of any real consequence or value to me. So then I talked specifically about, societal health and the idea of the unbreakable bonds. So I talked about what I called indicators of societal health, emotional attachment to ideas, understanding and judgments, and what is an unbreakable bond, what is an important unbreakable bond, and the importance of unbreakable bonds. So then I'm starting to kind of like put the thing in terms of my particular self within the context of the idea environment that I see myself in, which was a little bit of a kind of like a understanding of the circumstance. So that took me up to the first 20. 21 was force, power, and rule and persuasion. Then 22 was tradition and culture. Then I went specifically to a series of pieces that I found in a kind of consequence within Whitehead, which was love, beauty, and truth. And I talked about truth, beauty, and love, and the correlation of the ideas of value and truth as it relates to the ideas of Whitehead within his kind of chapter in Adventures of Ideas. That kind of brought me up to the end of that first group that I had done on another platform. And I felt, like I said, that it was important to kind of like put them in the same order, even though the kind of the way in which I talked about it and the ideas had kind of advanced to a certain degree. It was important, I think, to kind of just correlate those, just to kind of get it back on the map and then kind of go from there. At that point, I basically kind of moved into the new work, which was, let's see, what was that after that? Let me see. I'll look at the notes. Love. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Then what happened was I reverted back to specifics in terms of my own work. And the next 2 were 27 and 20. What was 28? 27, 20. Oh, yeah. 27, 28, and 29 were the different pieces of my work as I kind of looked back for them. One was the fact that there was an organic component, which the fact was what I wanted to have as a desire. And then the other one was a kind of like the sense of what I had done in terms of my work, which for a long time, like many other people, was very derivative until it kind of found its own place. So there was a point where I talked about entanglement and conditioning, which was, I feel, a way that I described the particular organic aspect in the way in which I kind of feel as if things kind of generate themselves in the organic environment. Then I talked about a second part, which was entanglement and conditioning, again, which was more in terms of like just continuing the same ideas. It dealt more with the kind of environment with which things in what I would call entangle. Then I went back to what I call measurement, and measurement was something that I kind of felt was the kind of surreal entanglement and necessity of my original kind of work that started out kind of back to my kind of earlier days. And I used a quote that is in Adventures of Ideas under Truth, where Whitehead talks about Poincaré. He says, Poincaré points out that instruments of precision used unseasonably may hinder the advance of science. For example, if Newton's imagination had been dominated by the errors of Kepler's laws as disclosed by modern observation, the world might still be waiting for the law of gravitation. The truth must be seasonable. And I think what I felt was there is this component reality, which is that understanding the nature of the things that you discover is an incredibly subtle, incredibly nuanced, and incredibly important thing to do, which kind of goes back to that idea of understanding, things well. I think the idea is it's not only important that you have the ability to generate, but you have the ability to judge and to kind of use your own critical acumen. But I think the main thing that I took out of that was there was a surreal component to measurement where if it is too distanced from itself and too abstracted, it can become incredibly disquieting and unnerving. And I feel as if like one of the things that I loved about surrealist work was that particular component. So then from there, we went back to the nature of the perspective within the metaphor. And then I talked about the idea of the fact that like a metaphor is an object that can be viewed in space. And that it was kind of like that the point of view is something that really could be more than just an analogy, in that the way in which an object is viewed is as important as is the most important thing, because oftentimes, even within the same use of concepts, the way in which they're structured without the kind of point of view, can conceivably end up down a dead end. It's that idea of novelty that allows you to get that unique perspective that deepens our understanding. So that was the kind of point of that. And then, nature perspective that we talked about, understanding and judgment as regards authority, the unbreakable bond of freedom and tolerance, value and consequence, the critique of the present. Then I talked about, then we get into episode 34, critique of the present non-organic architecture, which is just basically a kind of run through of the way in which I see the architectural world outside myself. And like, as I said, I have no, and I haven't since, I left the academy in 1990, I have no animosity, as much as I just don't feel as if I have a desire to follow the road that many architects are starting to follow. One of the bright spots or potential interests is the fact that as time has gone on and that previous generation, which has kind of been around for a while, starts to kind of dissipate and lose its influence, the start of some of these ideas that, I felt had been sidelined, which I kind of enjoyed, were starting to kind of gain favor and have started to kind of like emerge. And one of the ironic things was I felt as if the kind of Euro obsession in the United States architectural academies was kind of like not a bad thing, but kind of somewhat wrong-headed in terms of the fact that it kind of like took on a lot of kind of like very poorly formulated ideas and then basically led us down a kind of blind path. But at the same time, Europe right now appears to be, at least most of my friends who I kind of speak to are kind of European are from Europe or Asia and in the Middle East, who kind of like were fortunate enough to kind of have had that influence that kind of really kind of hamstrung New York City and a lot of American architecture. They weren't really so conditioned by that, and they kind of seem to do better. Which brings us kind of almost to where we are now. Episode 40 was, then I talked about, honesty as it relates to discourse, the loss of 2D design, which we did 2 pieces on. We have another piece coming up, which is the conclusion. That was done beautifully by Julie. Then we went into an American architecture, true organic impulse. Then we talked about our favorite organic impulse. And then we talked about organic design thinking, precedent, which was number 1. And this is process. So basically, let me just quickly recount what we talked about last week. We talked about the concepts of organic impulse, talked about what it was. I talked about the influences, talked about Bruce Goff, talked about my own kind of like education as a boy, kind of like playing and climbing and kind of finding circumstances that led me to kind of see a kind of like my own kind of formality rather than kind of like one that kind of seemed to be artificial and imposed. I talked about the difference between I talked about this idea that I kind of read again from Self-Reliance, which I find really beautiful at the beginning of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He talks about the fact that I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter, which was original and not conventional. The soul always hears an admonition in such lines, let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you is your private heart is true for all men. This is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For the inmost is due, times becomes the outmost. And our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. Familiar to the voices of the mind is to it much. The highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they set at 0 books and tradition and spoke not about men, but what they thought. A man would learn to detect and watch that gleam of light that flashes across the mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought because it is his. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. That was brilliant. I think the idea was that the universal comes from the individual through genius, and that is the consequence which we must pursue. But it only can be pursued through us as an individual, not through the kind of, from the kind of following of another path. And in fact, also when Whitehead talks about at the conclusion of Adventures Ideas, he said, this may have been how someone else had done it, the Greeks, the Romans, the West, however, it is not a path that can be followed a second time because 1, the context has changed, and 2, right, these people did not follow a formula. They were adventurous by their nature, which was the title of the book, Adventures in Ideas, finding the consequence in the circumstance. So to finish up, yet he dismisses without notice his thought because it is his. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else, tomorrow, a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time. and we shall be forced to take with shame our own option from another. So the conviction and the lack of cowardice is what he's speaking about. He's saying, trust yourself, understand yourself, be self-reliant. Don't be, that there's a valuable stubbornness. And that doesn't mean you don't throw away a bad opinion. You don't get emotionally attached to ideas or impulses. You understand that if you feel that the conviction is sound, you're betraying yourself when you basically betray it and give it up to someone else because you feel as if, and if they feel as if maybe you shouldn't continue that. And I think that was one of the things that I think was important, is that you need to understand that within the sense of your own potential. So we talked about the idea of architecturally provocative artifact, how I found it in terms of things that I did, how I saw it in other architects. And I didn't know necessarily, and this goes back to the same idea, I wasn't sure that it was important to go back, because I felt it was just what we've been warned not to do. We don't go back and basically follow in the footsteps of somebody else, but we understand and appreciate a valuable principle and then take it as our own. So for me, though there was never talk of an architecturally provocative artifact, I felt that for me, I discovered this in the work of people like Bruce Goff, but also in my own activities as a child and my own feelings and impressions. And I'll kind of go into that more in terms of the process. But right now, we've talked way too long in terms of that. But I think it was good to kind of go over this, because I think this particular rumination does pull together a lot of strings for a lot of previous pieces. So without further ado, the most important part and the most interesting part of these little ruminations is what's new in Julie. So, hi, my loved one. Hi. What is new in Julie? Tell us. Oh, no, P.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Here, have a sip. Sip.
Okay.
Have a sip. I love one.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll take all night.
All right. Okay. So I'll do a little bit more, and then you can come in.
Yeah, I'll be there.
All right. Okay. Good. All right. So.
Sorry, give me 2 minutes.
Spoke about the precedent, the way in which I kind of felt as if my feelings about this idea of what I call organic design thinking came about. And now we'll kind of talk more about the process. So I'd written this piece a while ago, and it's called two things: delineation of a universal thought mechanism. The other was operation of the process of organic design thinking. Organic design thinking is a process employed to cultivate by way of nurturing and restoring our inherent methods of thinking towards its maturity or self-sufficiency or self-reliance. We have identified within our inherent state of thinking 3 main components that we believe are the most essential and vital components within our inherent method. And as a result, we believe that they are the ones that most necessary to be understood, protected, and thus cultivated, which are visualization, conceptualization, and perspective. Now, notice I separate perspective from visualization or conceptualization, because I believe that's the driver of the other two. Visualization, which is the pictorial delineation of information provided by the imagination and expressed by, but not limited to, shapes, symbols, patterns, structures, and notations. Conceptualization, the delineation of the information provided by the imagination and expressed as ideas generated and combined through metaphorical invention. So that is the process. So we now know that there's information, and there's the idea of generation, that from things, other things can be generated. So concepts basically kind of eventually kind of become their own kind of children of their own kind of parents. So someone asked me, could you give me an example? And I use the example that kind of very simple, conventional. I could use the one of Ortega that he uses in the introduction to the process by way of an introduction, by saying that the cypress is the ghost of a dead flame, where he kind of gives you a specific image. But I would like to say, as if like the way of what it doesn't talk about it, in terms specifically of the construction, is imagine if we have a a computer or a laptop or an iPad. And we think about the fact that what we did was we combined a typewriter, a telephone, and a television set. So we had the idea of a TV, which was usually a one-way operation, but by linking it to a telephone, it now could operate in two directions. So I can see someone and someone can see me at the same time, which is when we do a virtual chat. But the typewriter became valuable just because it was allowing us to basically talk to each other. So when we used to just, we can talk to each other over the phone, or we can talk to each other using the typewriter. So this was a kind of way in which like the computer was able to be seen as a construction basically by combining the capabilities of these things, but then also advancing capabilities that were not previously available. I mean, the TV was a one-way device. It's now not. It's now a kind of screen that can be seen in both directions, which was aided by the use of the typewriter and the telephone, which were inherently melded into this one thing.
Good
Okay.
point.
Thank you, Pete. So
Thank you.
next we'll read the
Okay.
operation of the process we're getting done thinking.
Okay.
But we'll do that after This Week in Julie.
Okay.
Do, do, do.
Hello, all. Fanfare. Okay.
Actually, I would say fanfare for the uncommon genius.
Thanks, P.
Go, welcome, Pete.
He's great.
Yes. Oh, look, there's somebody watching.
Oh, that's very nice. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so
Okay. So what's new in This Week in Julie?
well, yesterday at the Met, I just finished my newest science drawing, my newest metaphorical science drawing, which you see here, here, and here. It is called Fermata of a Perinating Organ. Nicola Amati perpetuates luthiers after the plague of 1630. I know it's a lot, but there's a lot going on. That's the title and the subtitle. So I used a fascinating porcelain vessel that's currently on view at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a vessel in a really astonishing exhibition of Art Nouveau ceramics and porcelains, mostly from Copenhagen, from Scandinavia too, from France, of course, home of Sèvres porcelain. And this piece is by Taxil Dote, a truly marvelous, eccentric artist in ceramics who I believe did work for Sèvres. And then on the side, he produced these wacky, whimsical, fantastical pieces that looked like somebody found them in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle Earth. They are absolutely enchanting pieces. And I found...
And that's that main piece we have here, right? Which
Yeah.
it has the spiral conch on the
yeah,
top.
you can do the
It has the
description.
gourd kind of shape in the middle, and it has this kind of ceramic base.
Yes, it actually has its own stand. The Taxil Dote did sculpt. The interesting thing here is when
Oh, we got a
one...
heart.
What?
Thank you. Someone gave us a heart.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Let's also take a moment.
Yeah.
We've gotten
Yes.
so many new supporters and subscribers to the channel.
Mhm.
And I mean, I owe it all to Julie because Julie's been out there kind of like telling people about it and kind of like, and it also they kind of, most of the time they come to just listen to you, which makes sense. I mean, that's what I would do.
That's why I'm doing a cameo.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think that's always so good. So I want to thank everyone and
Thank
thank
you.
our viewer. And,
Thank you, our viewer.
I look forward to, hopefully making this something that is enjoyable.
And maybe a part of your life. I mean, this is the substance of our lives. And even if you don't draw, it doesn't matter. If you absorb the substance of what we're saying, you can apply it to anything.
And engage in the adventure of ideas.
And engage with us in the adventure of ideas.
Yeah.
You can take these ideas that inspire us when you listen to your favorite music, when you read a book. And here's an important point. A lot of people, well, those who still read, think that reading is a passive activity. We Do not think so
No.
in any way. It is an active verb, and the art of reading is something that has been very lost in contemporary society, and it's very sad. It is calisthenics for the brain. It is active, it's kinetic, it's exciting. I mean, you are constructing, a carnival of the mind as you are reading it.
True.
It's quite an adventure.
True. In fact, you always said that like it was important that not just as important as someone being a writer was in fact the way in which someone was a reader,
Oh yeah.
and that there was something in an art as a bit of an art form. And the same way I feel about criticism, I feel as if that basically it's a kind of underappreciated circumstance right now. And I don't mean the fact that like someone's a film critic or whatever. I'm talking about the idea of criticism as a way of life, as an operation within an individual. It is certainly something that has been neglected. But I think, kind of returning to that, that's kind of like where, we kind of like see that. But I believe that, another one would be basically your lexicon. I believe that an individual in their own work develops their own language. I mean, I would say that to me, the etymology and consequence of the operation of concepts is something that's very important to me, not just to understand what a word means, but to understand it in its essence and to use it in its purest form. So, sorry.
Well, I mean, for example, maybe after seeing my drawing, you may, the next time you have a pot of tea brewing, a pot of coffee, suddenly look at that teapot and watch it sprout a root structure system. And you may never look at that teapot the same way again.
Or the world.
Yeah. Meaning the art of pouring tea, enjoying tea is a very pleasurable and refined experience. But what if it also became a fantastical, experience, a transformative one?
Right.
And this sets loose the flight of your imagination,
right,
like it does ours.
Yeah, because the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's important that we have that opportunity, because within that is the opportunity for that adventure. The adventure that that Whitehead's talking about, in the way that individuals or societies or cultures kind of find their way through to a sense of kind of like greater heights from lower places, and the way in which I would say that the thing that first attracted me to Julie, most people would say the ravishing beauty is the first thing that people would come to mind. But I think the first time I looked into Julie's eyes, I saw into a sense of adventure that was unquenchable. There was no way that you could define the roiling kind of desire for adventure in terms of the realm of ideas and the realm of imagination than I saw in the eyes of Julie. And I think that was the point where I kind of saw something of the essence of an individual.
Thank you.
Okay. So, what else is coming up now that we've done this beautiful drawing? You have to tell us more about it.
Yes, sure.
Because the idea is that like...
Yeah, so the idea came, this series of altered states. Now, what I mean by that are the transformations that are going on. Think of something that's shape-shifting in front of your eyes. Think of porcelain that turns into a corm of a plant, that turns into a cormel, and I will explain. A number of plants, many of them flowering plants, when the environment, their present environment, is hostile for survival. There's a drought. It's too hot, it's too cold, there's a plague, there's a fungal rot, there are pests. Plants are eaten by everything from insects to herbivores. They're infested with molds, with fungi. They are pretty much attacked by almost everything, and they're eaten by humans. So they have, things. It's often a very hostile world for plants.
Remember the
the
monster? It's like, humans.
Exactly, the orange monster.
Oh, it's
Rudolph
people.
In
is it people, right? He says,
people.
people.
Yeah.
He runs away.
Yeah, that's the scariest thing.
People are scary.
So my point is that the taxial dote piece very much conjured a quorum. That's CORM, is in Mary, not corn. CORN is in Nancy. Most people have never heard of a quorum. It is an onion or bulb shape, but it's not a bulb. It's not like a tulip bulb. It contains all the genetic material for this plant to have a renaissance, but a programmed renaissance, just like apoptosis is programmed cell death. There is a programmed renaissance of life. So the plant literally can be reborn at will, which is quite a talent when things have improved. It's kind of like the situation we all find ourselves in now, with a world that's absolutely hellish and pretty terrifying. What if we all sprout a corm, and our corm sprouts a number of cormels, which are backup corms? They're smaller versions. So if we are set on fire, if we're eaten or consumed, or we are withered, as long as we have one cormel left, when times improve, when the world improves, we can be reborn into it fully formed. I think that is simply a glorious idea.
Yeah.
That's what my drawing is.
Mm.
That's what plants do.
Mm,
And that's a skill that we don't have.
no.
So
Like coming back in a time after folk music.
yeah.
Or something like that. Or
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. That'd be
So
nice to
that's
see.
it. And the operating metaphor, for those who didn't tune in last week, is about luthiers, or the makers of classical stringed instruments, violins and violas and cellos. So Niccolo Amati was the last surviving luthier in Italy in his time, when an enormous plague that most people don't even know about in 1630 literally killed most of the population in most of the great cities in Italy, the Italian plague of 1630. It wiped out his entire family, which a family would train other luthiers. They would not bring it outside of the family. Their secrets and their skills were passed down. And the entire art of violin making, at the absolute height of its beauty, would have been gone, lost forever, if Niccolo Amati had died. He survived, but he was the sole survivor in a grand lineage of luthiers who were wiped
Hence
out.
the term fermata.
Yes,
Because he was the fermata. He was the extended note.
yes.
It basically
That
allowed.
is in my title.
Yeah, I kind of figured that out.
Yeah,
That's why I used
absolutely.
it. Because, I mean, he
Yeah,
was the person who
absolutely.
extended the note
Yes,
in order for it to survive. So, like in that case, the
Exactly.
fermata was, in fact, the continuation of the vocation,
you're
which could
absolutely
have disappeared and never been seen again.
And exactly. And a fermata, for those of you not involved in musical
I had
transcription.
fermata for lunch. That's funny.
Did it have a salsa verde?
It did.
It's only good with a salsa
Yeah,
verde.
and capers.
Or a gremolata.
Mm.
Yum.
Mhm.
Always make sure to have lemon zest. It's part of
Mhm,
your.
mhm. I use
gremolata.
yuzu.
Oh, nice.
Nice. Exotic.
So he ended up taking on two other students who you will all know, Antonio Stradivarius and Guarneri.
Stradivari.
Sorry, Stradivari of the Stradivarius. Sorry, I didn't get a lot of sleep.
No, we know that. I
And
know.
he.
And I'm
he
being
took them
pedantic. I would have
on.
liked that. I should have let that go.
Okay, that's okay.
But somebody would have corrected us. It's like,
Yeah.
what's wrong
okay.
with you guys?
He took them on, and they were not at all in his family, but
Mhm.
everyone in his family was dead. So he trained the next generation of amazing craftsmen, and we would not have the instruments that we have now that rich people put their names on, who the people who actually have the talent and skill and play them don't even own. I must say that
That's
because it's incredibly sad.
Okay. So actually, that's a good place to connect back to what we're talking about.
Where's the cover?
Right here.
Oh.
in the fact that like what we're doing is
Yeah.
you've created this circumstance where
Mhm.
this piece that you've kind of made that is of a ceramic piece that you've
Mhm.
made very clear, which I think is very kind of obvious here,
Thank you.
right? What happens
You can
is
go super close.
you can go, you can see the ceramic
Nice.
part,
Mhm.
and then you kind of it's almost as if you're making like a scholar's object in a kind of Chinese case, but then using it as a corm, what you've done is you've kind of introduced the cormels into the corm, even though this is an artificial piece. You start to see the fact that the corm itself almost tends to look like it is in itself in an artificial state, as if it's become petrified by its proximity
Mhm.
to the original piece. So as if like it has again become suspended in that point of like,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
maybe not being able to survive, or the organic nature has
Mhm.
been kind of taken out. So
That's a good point.
it hangs in the balance.
It
So I
does.
was thinking about that when I saw it tonight, and I thought,
Mm.
you know, it almost looks as if everything has been, because in a way, you know, the ceramic aspect
Mhm.
creates this kind of sense of calcification or kind of like
Mhm.
suspended animation, because it's when you see an organic thing, it kind of seems it's alive. You know, it's kind of in the process. You can kind of feel it pulsating. You almost can
Mhm.
watch it move. But a ceramic piece, though it's used with with kind of, you know, organic components, it's not alive. It's not an organism. It will basically eventually decay and fall apart, but it's
Yeah.
not a life-sustaining thing. But in this case, it looks as if there's this balance between this organic piece and this inorganic
Mhm.
piece, and they both kind of struggled with each other, even though they've kind of gotten this moment of stasis or
Mhm.
suspended animation. So that brings us to the idea that this is something, these evocations, these delineations are the way in which we see and observe and understand beauty, truth, and love. So now reading the operation of the process of organic design thinking. The substrate for operation is to scale any artifact from a perspective that will allow what will be revealed to be its most provocative. For this to happen, you need to identify scales, your perspectives, for their potential to generate form. In order to do this, you need to train yourself to be able to read artifacts as regards scale and perspective. To commence operation within this process, we will need to coalesce an artifact which is an unrecognizable fragment or an unknown entity as pertains to the information that it will present and is. In addition, something the individual finds an affection for or an interest in. Now, one of the things that happen in a lot of things, and this is what's talking about in self-reliance, is it has to be something that relates specifically to a thing within yourself. There has to be some personal connection. Now, it doesn't have to be something that is really understood, but it has to be felt. Because I feel as if in the generation, it has to come through
Mhm.
that particular circumstance. Okay.
What's that?
What? What
I
happened?
think
Was
I
it?
wrote on my arm.
Oh no, P.
Yeah, right on my arm.
Oh, P.
Possible.
This condition illustrates the important condition which we refer to as perspectival novelty, which is key to our inherent state of thinking, and which we believe is the most vital trait found in innovation, and more importantly, our deepening of our understanding of the natural world. So these things that we do, right, the purpose of them is not necessarily the generation of some kind of novelty or kind of thing, but the idea of deepening our understanding of circumstance. Once the artifact is identified in its base state, the imagination employed to speculatively develop in detail that which is as yet not fully understood from the artifact, thus complicating and extending and the artifact. Once the complication is completed, we have completed one cycle. The individual employs as many iterations as reveals valuable form, morphology, and physiology regarding potential innovations, discoveries, and applications as they emerge. So, what I think happens here, which is novel, is the fact that rather than working towards a series of goals given as a series of objectives, the objective is open ended. It's basically the idea of seeing something that's like as if it would be a kind of apparition of curiosity.
Mhm.
So, it's a kind of provocation of novel utility. So what happens is the individual sees the apparition and understands that it has the potential for the provocation of a novel utility. Now, what do I mean by utility? One of the things that I think is the major bane of architectural existence is the fact that we have never questioned certain formalities for hundreds of years. I've always felt that the chair, for instance, is a torture device. It is
Yep.
basically there to
I'm
keep us.
uncomfortable.
You're always uncomfortable. What's the like? I mean, there are certain things the body does. The body sleeps. The body ingests food. The body digests food. The body, kind of sleeps, and it basically, it kind of gives off its refuse. So the body is constantly in a state of
Flux.
operation. Yeah, but
Yeah.
we don't really reflect that, and we also don't reflect a sense of adventure or provocation. We know what a chair is. We know what a table is. We know what a wall is. We know what a TV is. We know what a mirror is. We see these things as the things in which we kind of compile a series of activities, but based on the idea of architecture as a verb or a process, right? Say,
these things are static while we're kinetic, and
Right.
that's the problem.
Yeah.
We are morphological beings. We're constantly morphing throughout the day from minute to minute, hour to hour.
Mhm.
In fact, our metabolic rhythms change dramatically from morning to noon to night, yet our chairs don't, our beds don't, our desks don't. So in fact, if we had items that actually worked in tandem with our metabolic state, that would really be a lot more useful.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that I see as a kind
Yeah.
of major, totally agree. I'm going to follow up on that.
Okay.
I think that one of the difference between the things that we make and who we are is that we as beings and the way that we act, our utility, or what I would call our novel, even our novel and innovel utility, are basically an integration of processes, whereas our built environment is just a collection of parts. So, I mean, if you think about a mechanism stops working when one of the parts break. An integration of processes is how an organism exists. It's a kind of constantly fluctuating attempt to stabilize itself for as long as possible, which means that if a part breaks, it can basically reheal. It doesn't get replaced. It heals itself. But the problem is if the systems and the processes tend to become unintegrated, then the system breaks down and it dies. So that's a major difference in the way in which these things operate. My eyes are bothering me. It's the pollen is killing me. Anyway, so how do we get to that sense of finding those provocations, those architecturally provocative artifacts? I remember the first time, Julie always calls it the happy accident, the Turner painting. One of the things I always found that I really thought Turner was absolutely useless because, if you throw enough, and Giacometti too, is if you throw enough paint in there all long enough, it's like, I think you got something. Yeah,
like
exactly. It's kind of that thing. It's like, what is it? You kind of throw it against the wall, see what sticks or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the way in which I saw that.
You can always find a face in the clouds.
Exactly. It was finding the face in the clouds. And I think Turner and Giacometti were kind of perfect examples of that to me. It was like you just kind of found as if like, it's like you would see these things and it's like he feverishly it's like it's Caroline. It is. It's Caroline. I can see it. And it's like, oh my God, it's so deep. It's so profound. It's like, no, it's not really. It's just you never really could draw.
Well, if you've seen any documentaries, which we have on Giacometti and his process, you will see he would put down thousands of lines and erase them and put down thousands more, and then some critic would come in and say, "Oh, it's perfect." I mean, it was.
We're being a little bit unfair to him. I mean, he, there was a time when I had a tremendous amount of admiration for Giacometti, and I think that the intensity and the visceral way in which he kind of conducted himself was actually very encouraging for a young person. But when I realized that there wasn't really that kind of really great accretion it just kind of got to the point where it was just kind of fetishistic.
It was, but I actually think he was a really great sculptor. Far better as a sculptor than as a draftsman.
Yeah.
I think his skill lay in 3-dimensional work rather than 2-dimensional work.
Possibly. And in fact, I always found that like the Palace at 4 a.m. I find
Oh, I
that a
love the
beautiful
Palace
piece.
for him, which
think-
is living at MoMA.
Yeah.
So,
And I kind of found that like
yeah,
that
it's a great piece.
one of the things I found about him was there was this sense of like the kind of surrealist parlor game that he
Oh,
would do, where
yeah.
there was these series of kind of things. And I kind of
He
think that
was
that's
the embodiment of the exquisite court.
it was. It really
Yeah.
was. And in a way, I find that still I can kind of see the echoes of that in some of my own pieces, where I kind of found as if like there was a kind of sense where you would set up a configuration and you would kind of move that, almost like a Japanese garden where you kind of tend the rake and you kind of make different patterns and you move some of the objects. I remember that piece that I had that unfortunately that's the only remnant that
I
remains.
know. I'm hoping
So-
that you'll build another.
So the
around it.
idea was, one of the things about children is that children are kind of discovering their environment. They're finding out what their toes are. They're putting them in their mouth. They're finding out what their fingers are. They're trying to eat everything. They're trying to understand what things are. They don't know. And there's an adventurous aspect to kind
Yeah.
of come to understand what things are.
Well,
And everything to them is provocative. Everything to them is a
True.
potential artifact. Everything is full of novel utility.
it is. That's a good point.
And as we kind of condition ourselves away from looking for that novelty. Now, you could say that the education is to get to understand how to tie your shoes. My feeling is no. It's kind of understanding that as a way beyond that to what something else is. It's finding that perspective that allows a deeper understanding of the artifact. So what happens is it's not as if we kind of, that novelty is exhausted the moment we understand what all things are, because we never understand what all things are, because that's something that we understand. But we limit ourselves to that thinking when we do it in terms of architecture, which to me seems absolutely absurd, right?
I find children to be shrill and sticky.
And they're so dirty,
Oh my
and they
God.
smell so bad.
And they're
I-
so self-centered.
Oh my God. It's funny.
I'm
There's
not
a,
fond
well,
of
I'm not
children.
going to read. I was going to read the piece from Self-Reliance where he talks about children, but
Yeah.
that'd be good. But I mean, again, sometimes in the street when we're walking to and from the subway, these people come. There's all the people who kind of like, they solicit money from the Gen X kids. It's like, oh, do you want to save the whales? Do you want to do this and that? And there's the children people, and they come
Yeah,
like,
that's always
like,
funny.
it's like, do you love children?
They're
It's like,
approaching
oh
the
God,
wrong
no,
people.
not at all. I hate the
That's what I
things. They're
said.
like, they're dirty, they're smelly. They're
They're
screechy.
boring.
They're,
They're
oh my God,
screechy,
there's just
they're-
such a chore,
Yeah.
and it's like, I love kids.
Anyway, we should make our
Yes.
points.
All right,
because I
so-
don't wanna run out of time.
So basically,
I could also say what I'm doing next, but I want to.
you could, yeah. Oh, go ahead, do that. I just need like a couple
yeah.
minutes to kind of wrap everything
Oh,
up
do you
because,
want to wrap everything up?
well, yeah, let me just say, that
Mhm.
the process is kind of like one of the things I found was in this process, we're kind of like the anti-Giacometti, the
Mhm.
anti-Turner. And I think actually having never really
Mhm.
kind of had much interest in Turner, but because I kind of studied Giacometti and I enjoyed the kind of surrealistic pieces and I understood that there was an attempt to kind of create this deepening of the situation, I felt what really was missing for him was understanding how to identify the perspective at the point where he could make a significant thing. That's much clearer in the Mystery of Picasso when you watch the Mystery of
Oh,
Picasso.
that's a great.
It's so
film.
well done because you can actually watch
If
the
anyone
construction.
hasn't seen The Mystery
Yeah.
of Picasso, we highly recommend it.
So anyway, what I think happens is I found that the two tools that architects have are drawing and model building. And I think that one of the things that happens is just the same way that I am myself in my circumstance, and Ortega understands that idea of the drama that we talked about a couple weeks ago when we said, like, it's not a question of function follows form or form follows function, that there's a dynamic kind of dialogue and a drama between form and function. And that's the way in which you can provoke this circumstance, is that provocation of, if there is this utility, how would it take place, and what would the shapes that surround it be, or what would its environment be like? And on the other hand, if there was the introduction of a form, what utilities might emerge? So I think those two things is that using models and drawings to basically kind of anti-Giacometti the circumstance where you actually tried to create more understanding, more clarity, more definition, rather than just kind of having this, faces in the clouds kind of thing. That's okay. So in that case, those were the two pieces that allowed the things to come together. Was that the idea was the location from which the information is viewed, the perspective, right, was that thing that allowed you to see that's the place in which I find this provocation of novel utility. And that novel utility could be either inherent in the form or be in search of a form. But I remember when I was a child, just like all children, everything was, what was this for? I could maybe cup it with my hand. I could hold on to it. I kind of like, the world was very tactile. And, you kind of found these things. And no, they did understand how to tie my shoes, and I can still do it. Lucky me. And I can kind of find those things and kind of, ride a bike and stuff like that. But then you realize these things are only base configurations. There's a whole list of things that need to kind of be developed. And I think, Goff understood that, Wright understood that, Whitehead understands that, Darwin understands that. I think the great geniuses, Leonardo obviously understood that. The great geniuses understood the fact that things basically build upon other things, and that there isn't this kind of idea that someone who had the first idea ultimately owns that territory forever, which I think is an incredibly absurd idea. Anyway, so that's it for the provocative artifact. That's it for organic design thinking as a process. It's become the way in which I think about things. It's become the way in which I generate things. And next week, let's see, what do we have for next week? I think it's related to this too, but specifically, what is it? And then we're going to give Julie the last words, because that's always the best. We should always Julie's the last
Sounds
wrap up.
very final.
Yeah. Okay,
Not in a good way.
No, we won't. We'll find a way to say it. So next week is conditioning and the artifact. Oh, nice. Good. Oh, good. Yes. So, final thoughts. That's what we'll call it. Julie's final thoughts.
No, it sounds like I'm going to die.
You're never going to die.
No, but
Okay. Okay.
Anyway,
Julie's summations?
yeah, that sounds
Julie's
That
summations.
sounds it.
I love
Okay.
that.
I have to talk fast, right?
Yes, you have 2 minutes. Go.
The marvelous world of the unseen, the unrecognized. I'm talking about some of the minute things that are massively important in science and the natural world that drift by, human consciousness and perception. A couple things to keep in your mind. Why do tree hoppers, those fantastic insects that look like they have a pyramidal sail for a body with this strange shape, why do animals have intriguing shapes? Why are things often perplexing? Because we don't know what their true operations are. It turns out, not surprisingly, that leaf hoppers or tree hoppers have this shape because they carry an electrical charge, and that the hairs on their body in this shape act almost as a radar for the electrical signals being given out by their predators, and that they can actually pick up on them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's, it's like, remember when they said, I remember
I can hold it.
that, they used to say those big bumblebees. It's like, well, they don't know, we don't know. What they should have said is, we don't know how they fly.
Right.
But what they said was, they shouldn't be able to fly.
Of course.
Which is like, obviously they're flying, you idiot.
Right.
So anyway,
That's what I mean.
speaking of architecture, provocative artifacts, the Quay brothers film.
Yes, I was going to.
We should have kind of like, let's pull. I have the card here.
Let's plug it now.
Sanatorium Under the Sign of the Hourglass. We saw it last week twice. It's brilliant film.
Tell
if you want to, playing at the film forum. If you want to talk about the place for which you can find architecturally provocative artifacts, or at least understand a place where such things can be generated, this is the place.
It's a mythical marvel of ancient Europe, classical
Yes.
music, master puppetry.
Mhm.
It's mystical. It's terrifying. It's haunted.
It's brilliant.
It is a brilliant
Yeah.
film. We urge you to
Okay.
go see it.
So the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to maintain it this way.